Our topic today is entitled Lost Cities of the Dead. It has been my privilege to visit so far about 40 countries of the world. But the most fascinating finds are off the beaten track of the tourist. Of recent years, quite startling discoveries have been made, which have surprised and even confounded the scholars of the world. As most people know, the Bible lands of the Middle East are the cradle of civilization. This is where the beginnings of civilization occurred. Today we take you to the ancient land of Egypt to hear about finds from the lost cities of the dead. Egypt, as you know, contains the oldest continuous civilization in the world. And the first thing we notice in Egypt is the mighty Nile River. It dominates the country. As you probably know, there's no rainfall in Egypt, and so the age-old saying has come down through the generations: Egypt is the Nile, and the Nile is Egypt. And from earliest times, Egypt has been irrigated by that mighty river. Coming to Cairo, here we see a blending of the ancient and the modern. Cairo was built in the Middle Ages. And one thing that strikes the tourist when he comes here is the inhumane treatment of the animals. And why should this be? It is believed it is due to a lack of the influence of the Christian religion. The Muslim religion has dominated this area for about 1200 years, and its effect can be seen in the life of the people. Now, when we come into Cairo, we see the native Egyptians, or the Fellahin, and these people, they are quite a shock when the tourist realizes and sees how they really are. 90% of them are illiterate. And this is very interesting in connection with the great predictions of the old Bible. Now, we come out of the center of Cairo to one of the suburbs, Heliopolis, which means the city of the sun. Here we see the site of an ancient city, 3,000 years old. Many years ago, they saw a pillar of stone sticking out of a sand dune. They investigated it, and they found that it was the site of the famous temple of On, which is mentioned way back in the book of Genesis by Moses the prophet. Now, this rocked the scholars of the day because this temple had been mentioned by Moses in connection with Joseph, the Jewish prime minister of Egypt. But Moses, they reckon, could neither read nor write. But this discovery showed that the old Bible was true, and Moses must have been able to read and to write. In Cairo, we see the famous Cairo Museum, one of the great museums of the world. And here is a fascinating collection of finds from the sands of Egypt. Because of no rain being in Egypt, these objects have been remarkably preserved in the sand. As we enter through the gate of this great museum, we see a pool containing papyrus plants. Here they are preserved. Anciently, these plants grew profusely throughout Egypt. But 2,700 years ago, one of the Hebrew prophets was inspired to declare, as recorded in the 19th chapter of the prophecy of Isaiah, in verse 7, the paper reed, that is the papyrus plants, the paper reeds by the brooks, by the mouth of the brooks, and everything sown by the brooks shall wither, be driven away, and be no more. And today, after 2,700 years, this prediction is still true. There are no papyrus plants throughout Egypt except in the Cairo Museum. Now, just outside Cairo, there are the three fascinating pyramids. Altogether around the city, of course, are 67 different pyramids, but the largest one is the Pyramid of Cooke, one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, the only wonder left. It's about 4,000 years old and covers 13 acres, the mightiest structure ever raised by man. It dominates the landscape, and it certainly fires the imagination. This pyramid is 480 feet high, contains 6.25 million tons of stone, the average weight of which is 2.5 tons. And these stones fit so neatly that neither hair nor needle can be inserted between. The whole construction is so accurate that no measurement is out for more than an inch. It took 20 years to build a masterpiece of stone. The four sides point to the 4 points of the compass. You can climb to the summit. It's like a giant stairway. And originally it was covered with a smooth, polished white stone, which must have glistened in the sunlight. The pyramid was first opened in the Middle Ages in search for treasure, but the only item discovered was the empty sarcophagus. Inside, it's impenetrable darkness and utter stillness, and all around are masses of stone reared by hands long since dead. The passage up further divides, the top one into the king's chamber and the bottom one into the queen's chamber. Some have held that this pyramid was a prophecy in stone, but this, of course, has now been utterly disproved. The original name of this pyramid was Cooke, meaning the tomb of Cooke. In the dim light, if you hit the coffin, a sound rings down the passageways. This pyramid was a tomb. And why was it so built? The Egyptian religion held that unless the pharaoh's body was preserved, there was no hope of an afterlife. What a futile belief this was, in contrast to Christianity, which teaches that though the body goes to dust, if we're faithful to our God, our bodies will be resurrected in the last days. Now, when they first entered into this pyramid, they found that the body of Cooke was missing. Undoubtedly, it had been taken away by grave robbers in ancient times. Now, while the Great Pyramid speaks of the ability of ancient man, it also speaks to us of the futility of pagan religion. Now we come to the Sphinx, which is nearby the Great Pyramid, and perhaps this is the most famous of Egypt's monuments, and it's also the most inscrutable. The riddle of the Sphinx has baffled minds through the ages. The Arabs have called it the father of terror, and it has stood as a sentinel against the shifting sands for thousands of years. In ancient times, the Sphinx was approached along a huge ramp from the desert. Nearing the Sphinx, the person would be breast high with it, and then he would descend 40 steps to a unique temple between its huge paws. And as the worshipper descended the steps, the Sphinx grew more gigantic till it towered above him, gazing into space. Its face was originally red, not with embarrassment, but with paint. But now they are certain as to what the Sphinx represented. It was Khafra, represented, or rather the builder of the second pyramid, who was represented here as a god guarding his own body in the pyramid. Now from this temple, or rather, between the paws of this great pyramid, there is a temple. And from this temple, the Egyptian priests could make their voices echo from the Sphinx. And this deceived the worshippers into thinking that the Sphinx actually spoke to them as a god. This helped the priesthood, of course, to enslave the people, which has always been the curse of false religion. One of the marks of true religion is that it gives real freedom to those who accept it. Now, the Sphinx and the pyramid, because of their massive size, etc., are a testimony to the skill of ancient man. This Sphinx was 75 feet high, its head was 33 feet high, its mouth 7 feet wide. In 1837, they bored a hole 30 feet into it and found it was comprised of solid rock. The Sphinx tells us that ancient man must have been highly developed, but he wasn't ignorant or backward as we have been led to believe. And of course, this is what was stated in the old Bible thousands of years ago. Now, during an excavation of this Sphinx, They found a tablet in front of it, which told how an Egyptian prince became a pharaoh due to the untimely death of his older brother, the firstborn. The time of this corresponds with the exodus of Israel from Egypt, when the firstborn of Egypt were slain by the judgments of God. Now, according to many scholars, this biblical story explains the account on the tablet. And if this is so, here we have further evidence of the accuracy of the old book. So, friends, even the Sphinx, whose origin goes way back into the dim ages of the past, sheds new light on the Bible story. Well, continuing on from here, we come up the Nile to the site of an ancient capital of Egypt, the temple city of Memphis. It was here that the prophet Moses approached Pharaoh on behalf of the children of Israel and pleaded with him to let my people go. In the 13th century after Christ, an Arab scholar writing of Memphis said, "Of the wonderful works of Memphis, which confound the intellect, and to describe the most eloquent man would labor in vain." Memphis must have been a remarkable city. It was packed with temples and idols of the Egyptian religion. But at the height of her power, 2,600 years ago, the Hebrew prophet called Ezekiel was inspired to predict the doom of this great city. And this is what he wrote: "I will destroy the idols and will cause their images to cease out of Noth, or Memphis, and there shall be no more a prince of the land of Egypt." Now, it's an established fact that no native Egyptian has been a prince or ruler in Egypt for thousands of years, just as this Hebrew prophet wrote. However, 1,800 years after this prediction was given, the city of Memphis still abounded in temples and images, and it seemed as if the prediction had failed. But today, when you go to the site of old Memphis, all you see are a few broken statues, some palm trees, and a name. In the Middle Ages, it took a whole day to walk through its stately ruins. Now, it seems impossible to believe that a huge city ever existed at this spot. Such remarkable predictions as those in the old book have provided overwhelming evidence to millions of Christians that that book must have been inspired by God. At Memphis, we also see the fallen statue of one of the Ramses, one of the pharaohs, called Ramses II, perhaps the greatest of the pharaohs. He ruled for 66 years and had over 200 children, but not to the same wife, of course. However, Memphis, with her temples and idols, has completely vanished. Neither has a native Egyptian prince ruled over that ancient land for centuries of time. As we pass up the Nile, we see the native Egyptian farmers and their families. And when one mingles with these people, he is appalled at the poverty and the ignorance and the degradation. On the other hand, when we see the corn crops, they remind us of the famous corn of ancient Egypt, which supplied the markets of ancient Rome. Now, outside Memphis is an ancient cemetery, and here is seen the famous Step Pyramid, the oldest pyramid in Egypt. It's the first stone building ever known to have been erected by man, and this was the tomb of King Zoser, a pharaoh of very early times. Inside this pyramid, they found a tomb of alabaster, and when it was opened after 4,600 years, they found that the mummy was missing, but inside were 30,000 vessels made of beautiful alabaster, a testimony to the intelligence and culture of very early man. Now, they also found here a walled-up chapel by the pyramid, and in it was a magnificent statue of King Joseph himself, one of the earliest statues of Egypt, but also note one of the most majestic. It's a startling fact that often the older the structure, the finer it is. And the jewelry that's been discovered is, is also uh, like that. And also some of the works of art. The further back we go in many ways, the more refined and cultured mankind was. And this is quite a shock. And it confirms in an amazing way the old record of the Bible, which declares that man originally came from a perfect state. Now also here in the cemetery is the restored temple, or the old temple that's been restored. And also there are 5 miles of tombs in this area where are buried many of the pharaohs of ancient Egypt. When one looks at this temple, the capitals of it are still there in a state of perfect repair, even though they're thousands of years old. Now, inside, in the interior of the temple, we find the spot where occurred the great worship, or the startling worship, of the bull, an extremely elaborate religious cult. This bull was housed as a god in this temple, tended by priests and worshipped with practices that shocked the ancient Greeks who came to visit at that day. When the bull died, he was embalmed and buried with elaborate ceremony. Now they unearthed nearby an underground cemetery of these bulls, and above it was the site of a beautiful funeral chapel fit for a magnificent king. In the gallery beneath, with great pomp, these bulls were interred. The gallery is about 1,120 feet long, with separate chambers, and you can quite imagine how its discovery caused a sensation. In each chamber, they found a huge sarcophagus or coffin of polished granite that weighed 72 tons, and inside was the embalmed body of a bull god. Just imagine. The religion of the Egyptians was astonishing for the number of animals that they worshipped. The lion was worshipped, the hippo, the ram, the cobra, and even the crocodile, where it was worshipped in a temple on the banks of the Nile. They also worshipped the dog, and they even discovered a great cemetery of embalmed cats, which was superstitiously revered. Now, the old Bible records that the Egyptians enslaved the Israelites who dwelt in Egypt and used them as builders of their cities. A wall painting found in the tomb of Rekhmire, one of the prime ministers of old Egypt, a prime minister of Thutmose III about 1500 BC, actually pictures the Israelites as slaves working in a brick kiln. Now, the old Bible said that the Israelites built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. Today, these 2 cities have been located, and it was found that they were treasure or storage cities for the military campaigns of the pharaohs, thus confirming the old Bible record once again. So we continue up the mighty Nile, and now we come to another old capital of Egypt called Beni Hassan. Here we see Egyptian farmers on their way to the market. But what we are looking for is a famous statue that is here, a statue of a woman pharaoh called Hatshepsut. And who was Hatshepsut? Well, the evidence is now clear that she was the foster mother of the prophet Moses, who was called, remember, the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Her father's name was Thutmose, her mother's Ahmose, and maybe this explains why she called her adopted son Moses when she found him among the bulrushes by the Nile. Now, in the hills around Beni Hassan are the tombs of the nobles of ancient times, and inside one of them are some very interesting wall paintings. They depict people from Palestine visiting the city, And the period corresponds to the time when Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob lived in Palestine. And this picture reveals what the people from Palestine looked like in that day, the kind of garments they wore, the utensils they had. And these remarkably coincide with the pictures given by the Bible of those times, thus confirming again the historical accuracy of the old book. So up the Nile we continue, and now we come to another marvelous city, a dream city, the city of Tel El Amarna. This city stretched for 6.5 miles along the Nile. It was built when Egyptian culture was at one of its peaks, and its palaces, temples, and civic buildings were breathtaking. Its chariots were plated with electrum. Today, the site, of course, has been thoroughly excavated and a number of things restored. There we see a nobleman's mansion, illustrating the high standard of living of those times, revealing refinement, culture, and artistic skill. Here we see a statue of an Egyptian beauty who quite favorably compares with our beauties today. You know, friends, these things show that ancient man was not barbaric, as we have been led to believe, that he was not a Stone Age man. In fact, the further we go back in the science of archaeology in so many ways, the more refined and cultured we find that man was. Now, the builder of this dream city of Tel El Amarna was a pharaoh called Akhenaten. However, although the culture was so high, the morality was extremely low. This pharaoh married his own daughter, and this seems to have been a common practice of the pharaohs. They also married their own sisters in order, it is believed, to keep the throne within the family. Now, another priceless find here was the head of Nefertiti, the first wife of Akhenaten, the mother-in-law of Tutankhamun. Her statue is claimed to be the most beautiful ever found in Egypt, and Nefertiti is considered to be the world's most beautiful woman. This illustrates again the high culture and refinement of ancient man. But the most important find at Tel Amarna was a large collection of inscribed tablets. A peasant woman digging in her backyard unearthed them, and they proved to be the filing cabinet of Akhenaten the king. On deciphering them, scholars found they comprised correspondence from the various Egyptian governors of the empire. Among them were found letters from Palestine appealing for military aid because they were under attack by the Hebrews who were invading Palestine. This confirms the historical record of the book of Joshua in the Old Testament. All right, we continue up this great river Nile, and now we come to Luxor, a spot visited by millions of tourists. Here is the site of the marvelous Egyptian city of Thebes, consisting of 100 gates and gleaming with gold. For stateliness and beauty, Thebes was a byword of the ancient world, but today all one sees are two small, poor villages, Luxor and Karnak. All that remains of Thebes are the ruins of a magnificent temple, the Temple of Luxor, much of which has been excavated from the dust. Originally, a great area of its courtyard was covered with silver. Thebes was Egypt's capital when she was at the peak of her power 3,000 years ago, or to 4,000 years ago. And it was a great center of learning. The Egyptian name for it was No, N-O. Now, when Thebes was in the height of her glory, the Hebrew prophet Ezekiel was inspired to write of her doom, and this is what he said: I will make Pathros desolate, and will set fire in Zoan, and will execute judgments in No, or Thebes. And down further he says, and Thebes, or No, shall be rent asunder. What a prediction to make of that marvelous city in the heyday of her power. Well, this prediction was first fulfilled by the Assyrians and Persians who overran Egypt. And as the centuries rolled by, Thebes gradually became depopulated and was covered by the sands of the desert, reminding us again of the remarkable accuracy of the Hebrew prophets of long ago. Now, 2 miles along the bank of the Nile River from Luxor is Karnak, and here we find one of the great wonders of antiquity. We see first of all the propylon of Ptolemy, one of Karnak's famous gates. At the main entrance we walk up the famous avenue of sphinxes. These were covered by silt and sand for millenniums of time. But then we enter into the temple area of Karnak, and the buildings and columns grow bigger and bigger. Here we see the largest temple ever built in all the world. It covered 62 acres, believe it or not. The vastness of its ruins are simply overpowering. One feels like a little pygmy amid the silence of those mammoth pillars. 100 of them are still standing. We see there the famous hypostyle hall. And the distance to the gateway in the background is a third of a mile. Originally 134 mighty columns in 16 rows, 80 feet high and 30 feet in circumference, stood here. They covered 1,500 square feet. It was an architectural wonder of the world. And beyond the first hall there is court after court and shrine on shrine for a third of a mile. The roof was made of huge stone blocks and huge windows made of alabaster. Originally on the columns and walls was written in hieroglyphics the history of ancient Egypt. It was fantastic workmanship, and the temple was dedicated to the sun god Amon, whose golden statue was worshipped with great superstition. The temple took 2,000 years to build, that is the whole 62 acres. But what a striking testimony to the might and knowledge and skill of ancient man. Now, old Egypt was famous for her obelisks, those marvelous needles of stone that were made from one piece of solid rock. They were cut clean out of the rock and conveyed many miles to their place of erection. One of the great obelisks found at Karnak belonged to Hatshepsut, the foster mother of Moses. It was 90 feet high and weighed 350 tons, and originally it was covered with solid gold plate. This female pharaoh planned to erect 2 other obelisks of solid gold, but did not live to complete it. However, her successor succeeded in erecting 2 obelisks of solid electrum, which were 75% gold, and each one weighed 37 tons. These were later given to the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal when he invaded Egypt to try and persuade him to save the city of Thebes from destruction. My friends, what amazing wealth Egypt must have had. We can now appreciate the statements in the old Bible that speak of the treasures of Egypt. The New Testament tells us that by faith Moses refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt. Little did anyone realize how vast the treasures of Egypt were that Moses refused. Now the Bible record tells us that at the death of King Solomon, a king of Egypt invaded Palestine, sacked Solomon's temple, and captured many Jewish cities. For many years, this Old Testament account was ridiculed and reckoned to be unhistoric. There was no evidence for it. Now, the Bible, of course, was and still is by many considered to be mostly mythical and is not accepted as reliable. But on the wall of the Karnak temple, they found a victory relief depicting Pharaoh Shishak making offerings to his god of 100 cities he'd captured. Among the names of these cities are the very ones mentioned in the Old Testament record. So here is striking confirmation of the historical truth of the Bible record. You know, it's wonderful to know that after all these thousands of years, the stones, as it were, are crying out and telling us how accurate is the Scripture. The site of western Thebes is on the opposite side of the Nile from Thebes, from Karnak rather, and it is utterly desolate today, just as the Bible prophets indicated it would be. We cross this mighty Nile, and here we see the typical Egyptian boatman. You know, when one studies these people, one of the most ancient races in the world, he is constantly reminded of the accuracy of the old Bible prophets. 2,600 years ago, the prophet Ezekiel declared, "I will bring again the captivity of Egypt and cause them to return to the land of Pathros, into the land of their habitation. And they shall be there a base or low kingdom. It shall be the basest or lowest of the kingdoms, neither shall it exalt itself any more above the nations, for I will diminish them, that they shall no more rule over the nations." Now, what a terrific prediction to make of the original Egyptian people. Of most other ancient peoples who rejected the true God, the Bible prophets predicted their extinction. But of the ancient Egyptians, they predicted that their lot would be one of decline, of poverty, and degradation. It's remarkable how the present-day Egyptians, that is the Fellahin, in their facial characteristics, are exactly the same as their ancient forebears, as depicted on the walls of their temples and tombs. But what a contrast! The native Egyptian Fellahin is perhaps the lowest among men today, tragically, yet his ancient ancestors reached a height of civilization that was fantastic. What a fulfillment of the predictions of those old Bible prophets. So we continue on, and now we come into what is called the Valley of the Queens in western Thebes. And among the tombs here are those of the nobles. And what's of interest here to the observer? Well, my friends, in some of these tombs are wall paintings telling us more of the ancient Egyptian life. You know, way back in early times, the Greek historian called Herodotus declared that there was no wine in Egypt. And yet the book of Genesis had clearly spoken of the Egyptians and their wine. And, of course, the critics attacked the old Bible, claiming that here was evidence of its inaccuracy and unreliability. Well, when they opened one of these tombs of the nobles in the Valley of the Queens, the archaeologists found a picture, a wall painting, of the ancient Egyptians picking grapes and making wine. Thus, once again, as always, proving that the old Bible was right and the critics were wrong. So we pass on, And from the Valley of the Queens we come to the Colossi of Menon. These were giant forms that mystified mankind for centuries. Today, they stand as huge, dramatic witnesses of a vanished world. These two great statues were visited by thousands of pilgrims in the Middle Ages. They came here because of the uncanny singing sound that issued from the right-hand statue at sunrise. These two statues stand 70 feet high, equal to a 6-story building, and weigh 700 tons each. We now know what they were. They represented a pharaoh and his wife, actually the parents of Tutankhamun, and they stood at the gateway of a marvelous temple which has since vanished. But the most exciting discovery on the site of these stone giants was a great, or rather a fine, inscribed tablet. It was a record of Pharaoh Meneptah, in which he mentions the people of Israel. Now, for many years, the critics reckoned that Israel had no connection with Egypt, that the Bible record was just a legend. But when they found this tablet, it completely routed this attack of the skeptics. So the Colossi of Menon, my friends, remind us once again that the Christian's old Bible is right. In the distance from here, we see the remains of another temple that still stands, the Temple of Hatshepsut, reminding us again of Moses, the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Originally, this temple must have been an architectural masterpiece. On the walls of this temple are pictured in relief the birth and life and death of the famous female pharaoh. And you know, as I walked the halls of this great temple, I thought to myself, well, no doubt Moses, her adopted son, walked these very halls. For remember, he was the heir to the throne. And as one glimpses the greatness and the power of the ancient kingdom of Egypt, he realizes what it must have meant for that man Moses to give up the heirship to the greatest kingdom on earth of the day, and to cast in his lot with a people who were at that time in bitter slavery. What a tremendous decision. You know, the New Testament declares, by faith Moses forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. Undoubtedly, Moses realized that there was another kingdom, that there was another life, the life beyond the grave, that there was a kingdom to win, and that it was only gained through believing and in obeying the true God. Well, we now come to the famous Valley of the Kings, and what a desolate area this is. It's hard to believe that such astonishing discoveries should have been made in this spot. Here was accumulated the biggest collection of gold and precious stones in history. That is, until the United States acquired the world's gold a few years back. The hillside is like an anthill. Buried in the rock were the most famous pharaohs. Great passageways were cut into the solid rock for hundreds of feet. And with all their fabulous wealth, the pharaohs were interred amid great splendor. However, because of the enormous treasure, the graves were nearly always robbed. No grave had ever been found completely intact, and modern man never really knew the full truth about ancient Egypt and her glory. But all this, of course, was changed with the discovery of the tomb of Tutankhamun. The entrance to his tomb was covered with rubble from the tomb above it, and was left unmolested for 3,400 years. When the tomb was discovered, The entrance passages were filled with rubble, and a huge stone blocked the door. Removing this, they found steps leading down a long passageway, all full of rubble. The antechamber was full of the furniture and personal belongings of the pharaoh. There were his 4 chariots, plated over with gold, his ornamental alabaster boat of exquisite workmanship, and the minute details of this are almost unbelievable. Then there was his bed, designed in the form of a sacred cow, covered with gold, and under it were his golden slippers. There were other utensils made of beautiful alabaster, also over 300 gold statuettes. Now they also discovered in this antechamber a number of knives, and the experts were rocked when they were discovered, because among them they found one made from iron. Now the experts had reckoned that man had not developed the art of working iron until very much later. But of course the Bible had spoken of man using iron for many, many centuries back. But all this, of course, was ridiculed. The Bible was a fake. But this iron knife of Tutankhamun proved again that the old Bible was right and the experts were wrong. Now, the most beautiful object found in the antechamber was one of the thrones of the pharaoh, of exquisite workmanship, and on the back of the throne, of the gold-plated throne, was inlaid in metal a picture of the young king being tended by his wife, a beautiful testimony to the remarkable culture and the skill of ancient man. But another surprise was discovered in this tomb were the boomerangs. These connect the Egyptians with the Aboriginals of Australia. Scholars are now convinced, or rather have now proved by the boomerang, that the Aboriginals of Australia and the ancient Egyptians originally came from the Euphrates Valley, which is now Iraq. This was the area from whence man emigrated to the rest of the earth. And thus, this again confirms the truth of the Bible and of the book of Genesis. Now, in this tomb, that is in the antechamber, were hundreds of beautiful objects made of gold, alabaster, ebony, and lapis lazuli. At the end of the chamber was a white sealed-up doorway, and Howard Carter, the English discoverer, bored a hole through this and shone his torch. All he saw was a wall of gold. And so they opened the doorway, and they found a huge shrine covered with gold. It was like a golden room inside, and the seals, marvelously, were unbroken. So they opened the seals, or rather, broke the seals and opened the shrine. Inside, they found a second shrine, similar to the first but smaller, covered with gold. So they opened this, and there was a third shrine, covered with gold, and inside this was another shrine with 2 golden goddesses standing guard. When they opened the third shrine, there was revealed a magnificent sarcophagus or coffin of reddish sandstone, all in one piece. The lid alone weighed 1,200 weight, and inside was the marvelous effigy of the king. The coffin was made of wood coated with gold and lapis lazuli, beautifully wrought, and on top of it was an effigy of the king. And also on it was a small wreath of flowers, 3,400 years old. And when Howard Carter saw it, he was deeply touched to find that amid all the golden splendor, there was still evidence of human love and sympathy. But greater wonders were yet to come,
For on opening this first coffin, they found a second coffin, also covered with gold and inlaid with multicolored glass. This is reckoned to be the most beautiful coffin ever found in all the world. And on it also was an effigy of the king, again of beautiful workmanship. Now when they opened this coffin, lo and behold, there was a third coffin. And this one was breathtaking. It was made of solid gold and beautifully ornamented. Its weight astonished them. It weighed 1.1 tons, and its value today would be over $1.25 million without doubt. So when they opened this golden coffin, they found the golden mask over the face of the king, a mask of extraordinary workmanship, a most striking portrayal of the king. And this golden mask must be valued at over $1 million, an astounding revelation of the extremely high standard of ancient Egyptian culture. Now the king's face was found to be intact, and it was the serene, placid face of a young man revealing refinement and culture. He had died, they believe, at 18 years of age, and in the bindings of his mummy were scores of jewels, and the body was wrapped in several layers of gold web and precious stones. It's reckoned that the value of the tomb's contents was about $40 million. Think of it. But the astonishing thing, my friends, is that Tutankhamun was a mere boy king, a non-entity, as it were, among the Egyptian pharaohs. He existed when Egypt was in decline and impoverished. Now, if he could command such vast wealth, what must have been the riches of Egypt when she could command the resources of the whole civilized world of the day? No wonder the old book stressed the treasures of Egypt, on which Moses turned his back in order to walk the way of God. You know, had Moses clung to his right to be heir to Egypt's throne, undoubtedly, he too would have been embalmed at death and laid in a tomb with all his riches, and we probably would have discovered his mummy just as we have with the other kings of Egypt. But what a contrast. Instead, because of his marvelous decision, Moses was granted eternal life in the kingdom of God. What a worthwhile decision he made. And so, my friends, as we look upon these amazing finds from the lost cities of the dead, the truth is driven home to us that they indisputably confirm the writings of the Christian's Bible. You know, this is the book that most of our forebears accepted and followed as the Word of God. They took it as God's guidebook to men, and how justified they were in believing and following it. This is the book that's been under attack all through the centuries, but every attack falls to the ground. This book tells of a great and marvelous God who is interested in the life and destiny of every human being. Its greatest verse tells us that this great God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoso believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. In this book are the solutions to nearly all our problems today. It contains the secrets for the well-being of the whole family, for our children, for our confused youth who face a frustrating world, for parents with their increasing problems and heartaches, and for the aged in the sunset years of life as they face the great beyond. In this book there's wonderful hope, comfort, marvelous comfort, and real meaning to life. Therefore, we invite you to take this old book and begin to read it and search it.
and you will find within it that which will direct you in this life and in the life to come. Topic today is entitled Startling Disclosures of a Lost Stage. For thousands of years, men have been intrigued by the massive ruins of prehistoric man. These strange mystic monuments of stone have stood or lain in various parts of the earth for thousands of years. Who built them? How were they built? And what was their significance? Numerous attempts have been made, of course, to explain these things. The popular explanation is that this was a period when man and his evolution passed through a barbaric Stone Age phase. One of the latest attempts to explain it is that this was the work, or these were the work of astronauts visiting Earth from outer space. But recent efforts by scientists have yielded surprising results in regard to these prehistoric monuments of men. Dr. Gerald Hawkins, for instance, a British astronomer now of the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory in the United States, recently revisited England and determined that he would go down to Stonehenge in order to determine whether the claim in regard to the sunrise at the summer solstice was correct at Stonehenge. 9 days before, he set up his movie camera in the early dawn and trained it down the axis line at Stonehenge to include the south and circle archway. In the distance between the arcs is the famous heel stone, just visible in the murky dawn. Suddenly a band of brightness from the northeast and a flash of the sun appeared, rising right over the tip of the heel stone. What an impressive sight! It was so precise he was convinced it must have been planned. He examined various stones and archways, and he felt that they could all have significance. From several alignments he caught unusual sights of the rising sun through the archways. He wondered, could Stonehenge have alignment to the sun and other heavenly bodies at other times as well as at midsummer? He realized the potential of these ancient stones, but how could he work it all out? There was a possibility of 27,060 different alignments between 165 positions. With so many objects in the heavens, the alignments could point to almost anything. And then he suddenly realized the computer. And so he gathered together a team, trained them, and then fed into the computer the information. And they found 240 alignments that fitted the positions of the heavenly bodies as far as Stonehenge was concerned. Now, the next question, did the 240 destinations or positions mark the rise and set points of any heavenly body? They raced through the stars to check, but found nothing very startling. Then they turned to check the sun and the moon, and they were astonished. The more they checked, the more amazed they were. They found, first, every one of the 240 alignments had meaning. Secondly, the placement of the stone markers in relation to the sun and moon astounded them. Third, the chief positions pointed to a unique sun or moon position. Fourth, the stones were aligned to the equinoxes with remarkable accuracy. And five, the precision of the alignments was noteworthy. And the conclusion was that Stonehenge was a remarkable astronomical observatory. It was locked to the sun and moon as tightly as the tide, right through time. And not only that, they discovered a 50-year eclipse cycle that was unknown even to modern astronomers, but found on decoding Stonehenge. Not only that, there is one circle, 288 feet in diameter, called the Aubrey Circle, and it was discovered that this acted as a computer for predicting eclipse seasons and the years when the moon would be seen in the various archways and alignments. They formed a Neolithic computer, that is, a Stone Age computer, believe it or not. Now, the next question was, well, could these stones have been placed by chance? Was it a fluke? The chances of these placements being accidental
they found on study was 10 million to 1 against. So there it is. And the significance of these signs at Stonehenge, my friends, tells us that the builders, first of all, were very highly organized. The second, they were capable of sustained superior calculations. Third, that Stonehenge demanded of its creators an extraordinary blending of theoretical planning ability and practical building skills. In fact, R.S. Newell, the noted British archaeologist, declared, the man who placed those stones must have been a genius. And in fact, these scientists have declared that the Stonehenge building and all it involved compared to the United States space program. Now that seems to be unbelievable. It is considered to be the eighth wonder of the world. Quote, their final completed creation was a marvel, a thing of surpassing ingenuity of design in concepts and construction, an eighth wonder of the world. Now, what is the significance then of these discoveries? Well, my friends, believe it or not, these finds confirm the truth of the Christian's old Bible. You know, the old book has consistently taught that man once was in a perfect, mature state, that he was created in the image of God, that he was created fully developed, perfect, with tremendous mental and physical powers. But through disobedience, he cut himself off from his Maker, and a process of degeneration set in and ended finally in death. Stonehenge reveals that prehistoric man did possess great mental powers, just as the book of Genesis, written by Moses the prophet, indicated. Now, not only that, there are throughout Britain and other parts of the world remarkable stone circles from prehistoric times. They are called megalithic structures because they're made from large stones, and they are worldwide. Britain, France, Germany, Spain, the Mediterranean world, the Americas, the Middle East, India, etc. And startling disclosures concerning these have been made of recent years by Professor Alexander Thom, who was Emeritus Professor of Engineering Science at Oxford University. He has spent the last 30 years intensely investigating the stone circles of Britain, and he declares that they were astonishingly assiduous in their building with the megalithic builders. The scale, he says, is sometimes breathtaking. In Cooke in Brittany, that's in France, which is called the Mecca of the megalithic world, it is the most spectacular megalithic site in all of Europe. Thousands of massive stones stand in great battalions. Line upon line they stride across the countryside for miles on end. At Avebury in England there's a great avenue of stones and remarkable circles built with astonishing mathematical accuracy. At Dartmoor there are great lines of stones. Unlike Cooke, they don't march, they just trudge on endlessly for miles. There are thousands of these megalithic sites in Britain, and Alexander Thom has surveyed and studied at least 300 of these sites. And his conclusions are that Stone Age men were not just simple primitives, but could be intelligent, sophisticated mathematicians and astronomers. Using stones as calendars and clocks, men could measure and survey with the accuracy of a modern theodolite. That's saying something. Second, he established that Stone Age man used a megalithic yard of 2.72 feet, indicating an organized society with an agreed yardstick. The third thing he discovered was that Stone Age man had a calendar of 16 months in length based on the sun and which was synchronized throughout Britain. The fourth thing he discovered, in brain power, quote, they were my superior, unquote. and that is saying something. The fifth thing he discovered was that these Stone Age men used Pythagorean geometry to design their circles, etc. And this was nearly 2,000 years before Pythagoras, the Greek philosopher, was born. It has been commonly believed that Pythagoras was the father of geometry. He lived about 600 BC on the island of Samos, in the Mediterranean, and he founded a school of philosophy in southern Italy, and it was considered that this science of geometry originated with him. But Professor Tom says 1,000 years before the earliest mathematicians of classical Greece, people in these islands, that's Britain, not only had a practical knowledge of geometry, were capable of setting out elaborate geometrical designs, but could also set out ellipses based on Pythagorean triangles. So what a surprise that was. And nearly 2,000 years before Pythagoras was born, these men understood this science. And Professor Tom also quotes how the ancient Greek historians wrote of a British prehistoric man, he believes, whom they called the Hyperboreans. They were skilled astronomers who visited Greece and taught philosophy to Pythagoras and his followers. Well, what a surprise that is. And Professor Tom also found, in regard to these stone circles, that they consisted mostly of lunar and solar observatories, that is, moon and sun observatories. And there, of course, are about 10,000 megalithic constructions in Britain, and some of them, he shows, are quite fantastic. At Cooke, for instance, near John O'Groats, there's there a hill, the hill of many stains or stones, and they discovered that these were a kind of megalithic draft paper built to guide the builders in setting out their geometrical constructions. Now, what do you think about that? At Templewood in Argyll, Scotland, by the stone structures there, they found that prehistoric man could predict eclipses. And this is quite astonishing, because the study of the motion of the moon is a highly complex subject that has occupied the attention of the best mathematicians for the best part of their lives. But not only that, at Callanish, on the island of Lewis off the west coast of Scotland, this is called, there is a structure there called the Stonehenge of the North, and it has embodied in it numerous astronomic features, including a solar and a lunar observatory combined. And at Callanish, Professor Tom discovered that there they were able to detect moon wobble, or as it is technically called, cyclical perturbation of the moon. This was first discovered, we thought, by Galileo in the 17th century. But now, of course, these discoveries reveal that way back about 1900 BC, those there at the stone circle of Callanish were able to detect the wobble of the moon. So this was a complete surprise, startling disclosures of a lost age. Now also at a place called Ballacroy on the island of Jura, also off the western coast of Scotland, there are stone markers there for making an accurate observation of the summer solstice and the winter solstice. That is the longest and the shortest day of the year. This gave man, ancient man, a fixed point in his calendar, and he was able to be accurate to a 60th part of a degree, which is astonishing because modern man today can only do this with very fine instruments. Now, not only has Professor Tom come to these conclusions, but there are other scholars who also admit that Professor Tom has discovered something that really can't be gainsaid. Ewan Mackay, the British archaeologist, is one. Richard Atkinson, another British archaeologist with a great mathematical knowledge. Glenn Daniel, Norman Lockyer, Fred Hoyle, Cambridge professor, Gerald Hawkins, whom we've already mentioned. And the tremendous implication of these disclosures is that the latest knowledge of prehistoric man to date reveals him as an extremely intelligent, sophisticated and able person, not an ignorant, club-swinging savage evolving from lower forms of life. And this, again, my friends, confirms the old book, the book of Genesis, and the rest of Scripture. For the Old Testament record of ancient man and the New Testament allusions to that record clearly speak of our first parents, of our ancestors, as being made in the image of God, created from the dust. Man was made upright, the book says, mentally, morally, and physically. The first man possessed tremendous powers of reason. He communed even with his maker. He studied the sciences of zoology, ornithology, botany, and biology. He engaged in pastoral and agricultural pursuits. He had a knowledge of building construction. He was skilled in music, poetry, and song. He had a working knowledge of metallurgy. This, my friend, is what the book reveals concerning our earliest ancestors. And Professor Tom's findings indicate that this could have been so. Now, not only that, my friends, we find that ancient man had an extremely long length of life. And this, according to the book of Genesis, it indicates there that ancient man, on average, lived to an average age of over 900 years. And they retained their full faculties almost to the end. It indicates that degeneration had not taken the toll that it has since. Early man also was of giant stature, according to the book. Genesis chapter 6 verse 4 declares there were giants on the earth in those days. And according to the history of the Bible, the historic records there were giant races living in Palestine way back about 1900 and even later, 1900 BC. There is widespread evidence around the world for the existence of giant races in the past. In many parts of the world, we come across what are called dolmens, or giant beds, considered to be by the ancients, or many of the ancients, as mythical giant beds. You can see, or giants' graves, and you can see these in various parts of the earth. For instance, in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 3, it mentions Og, king of Bashan, who was a remnant of the giants. And he was overcome with the Ammonites, and the children of Israel came in from the desert and took over the land of Palestine. And according to the book, the size of this Og, king of Bashan, works out to 13.5 feet, or his bed, 13.5 feet long by 6 foot wide, indicating he must have been around about 12 feet. And in the book of Joshua, chapter 11, we find that there are people in the south of Palestine called the Anakim, of giant statues. In 1 Samuel 17, it speaks of Goliath, 11.5 feet tall, a coat of mail. He wore 110 pounds in weight. He had 4 sons, all who were also giants in stature. And it's interesting, when you go down to Hebron today, you pass through a little valley there called Eshcol, where the records tell us the 12 spies came, sent in by Moses to spy out the land. And it mentions the tremendous grapes that grew there, and the people were as giants. And around those low hills of the valley of Eshcol, you can still see the remains of old dolmens or giants' beds or giants' graves, confirming, my friends, that once there were giant peoples living in that area. And So this is the picture that is given to us in connection with these things. And you can go around the world, my friends, and see these dolmens or barrows, they're called in England, in many parts of the world. You can see them in Ireland, the Valley of the Boyne. You can see them at Cromlech, north of Dublin. You can see them throughout Brittany, at Carnac, and in many other places of the world. These great stone tombs. You can see them down in Spain. You can see them in Germany, in Holland, in Mallorca, the Balearic Islands, in Sardinia, at Malta, in the Transjordan. You see these dogs. Now, not only that, my friends, there are quite remarkable discoveries concerning concerning giant skeletons, remains of men. And the pity of it is that a lot of this information has been hushed up. It's not brought out to the light of day as it should be, because it conflicts so seriously with the concept of evolution. At Los Angeles, for instance, a number of years ago, when they were digging out a canal, they found 26 feet below the surface in the fundamental rock strata 7 huge skeletons. You can see these now in the Los Angeles County Museum, but they're unpublicized. In Texas, for instance, in a rock creek bed, they found footprints following the tracks of a dinosaur. And on measuring the footprints, they were 20 inches in length. I actually measured these, for they have now been transferred, or the rock has been transferred to the Metropolitan Museum in New York. And this would mean, my friends, these footprints would indicate that that man who was following in the tracks of the dinosaur was at least 12 feet in height. Now, this also reveals that ancient man existed as the same time as the dinosaur, you see, which knocks, of course, the evolutionary idea. Also, they have discovered other human remains under the mountains of California with bones of prehistoric animals. They found a jawbone of huge proportions, and among them was the Calaveras skull, 132 feet underground, under rock and lava, and it had a brain capacity of a highly intelligent man. Now, in the same area, they also came across a skull of great size, and in it was a double row of teeth. And this has been of great interest to some scholars, because when the Jews were in Babylon about, about 600 BC, they wrote up there their records or their knowledge concerning the ancient world. And when they described man who lived before the flood, ancient man, prehistoric man, they mentioned there that he had several rows of teeth, or some of them had several rows of teeth. And here they found the skull right under the mountains of California, and there was a double row of teeth. Interesting, isn't it? At Nevada, they found embedded in quartzite a human tibia, leg bone, 36 inches in length, about double ours of today, indicating that the owner of it must have been 12 feet in height. At Mexico, there's a great canyon there called the Barranca de Cobra, and there they found 34 mummified remains, 7 to 8 feet tall. 2 of the skeletons were 9 feet tall, and there were 6 children, all of them 6 feet in height. That's just the skeleton. At Montana in 1903, a Princeton University group went to dig out a prehistoric city and its remains. They found 2 skeletons 9 feet tall and a dog's skeleton, and the size of the dog, mind you, was equal to that of a horse, indicating that back in the prehistoric world, just as the old book indicates, everything was of tremendous size compared with us today because of degeneration. At South Carolina, for instance, many years ago, they found skeletons 8 to 11 feet tall, And the newspapers, in writing this up, reckoned that that race could step over a common rail fence, which of course was right. In the Aleutian Islands during the war, 1939, and Alaska, they found gigantic skeletons 9 feet high under volcanic ash and debris. At Peru, many years ago, they found many tombs of giant men. One, 150 feet deep in the sand, was 13 feet in height, mind you. Many others also have been discovered. For instance, Fiji, on the island of Rotuma, about 400 miles from Suva. There's the Rotuma village there. And they came across an ancient Stone Age cemetery a number of years ago, and they found the tombs are the same as the dolmens of Europe. And when they were making a road, they uncovered another large cemetery, and they found in it bones of people 12 feet tall, the natives, reburied them, and were, quite a bit scared about these tremendous bones. And also they discovered at Rotuma that they used to employ post watchers during the war on Mount Sororoa. And they built a guardhouse there. And while they were digging holes to place the poles for the guardhouse, they found 3-foot leg bones or tibias, indicating that the owners of them were 12 feet in height. They also found human feet the size of horses' teeth. And in caves nearby, they found some of them filled with giant human bones. Now, my friends, these are just some of the discoveries concerning the ancient giants of the past. And the significance of these discoveries, of course, is that it confirms the book. All this is evidence that what the old book claims to be so was so. That man was once of giant proportions, that he has degenerated, that he has not evolved from lower forms of life, that man originally came from God, that he had a high and noble ancestry, but that the race has gone wrong, the human race has gone wrong. As the old book says, in Adam all died, all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. And the result of sin, both man has cut himself off from the source of life, degeneration and death has been the lot of the race ever since. And today it looks as if the way man is going, he will be destroying himself, either by overpopulation, pollution, or nuclear war. And friends, in this great book, the Old Bible, we have brought to view the great plan of the Creator in regard to this earth. The human race is not doomed forever. Man originated in paradise, and according to the book, he's going to be restored to paradise one day soon. When we read the old book, we find it written to a marvelous plan. In the first 2 chapters of the book, Genesis 1 and 2, we have brought to view there a new heaven and a new earth. In the last 2 chapters of the old book, Revelation 21 and 22, we have brought to view also a new heaven and a new earth, a restoration of the old. In the 3rd chapter of the book, Genesis chapter 3, we have the introduction of sin and evil and death. In the 3rd last chapter of the book, Revelation 20, we have the exit or the end of sin, of sorrow, of death, and pain. But in the center, in the middle of the book, we have the cross of Calvary. And what was the cross of Calvary? My friends, on that cross, the Son of God, Jesus Christ, was nailed. And in his suffering, he paid the price for the sins of a guilty race. And all who accept that death on their behalf God accepts. For as the old verse says, the greatest verse in the old book, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Friends, as we think about these things that we have brought to your attention today, may it help us to realize well there is something beyond. There's something to live for. There's something that is worth believing. There is a hereafter. There is a great Creator who loves us and wants us with him in his kingdom. May we think